Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're in great company. We've got thousands of listeners who have a thirst for continual improvement and raising standards in business. Whether your interest is in quality, sustainability, or risk standards, I'd love to welcome you as a member to our online platform for all things ISO, the ISOlogy Hub. The ISOlogy Hub is the leading place to get access to all of your online resources, from in-depth training courses, through to our very popular coffee break training, to templates and action plans and many other resources to help raise standards. As a member, you get access to over 100 courses, taking you from learner to practitioner to leader. The ISOlogy Hub has all the resources that you need, which will really help to make your life easier and to help improve compliance in those business-critical areas. So if you'd like access to learning and compliance resources ranging from data privacy to environmental management, anti-bribery, business continuity, quality, health and safety, to name just but a few, the list is endless actually, then we'd love for you to come and join us. Just head over to the isologyhub.com. Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Thank you very much for joining me today. If you haven't already hit subscribe, then don't forget to do that so you don't miss any future episodes of the ISO Show. Right, so let's dive into the topic for today. I'm delighted to be joined by Boylan from ISO Baseline. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, how are you doing?
Great, yeah, really good. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, it's good to catch up with you again. The last time that we met, it was over at MX, the Net Zero event in London in November 2023. So yeah, good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you indeed.
Great. So when we were at the show, we were talking about the new changes that were coming in regarding ESOS, the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme. And I know that you're an expert in this area, which is why we invited you onto the podcast. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, the changes that will affect the European Directive on Energy Management and Energy Reporting, which affects organisations in Europe. Before we do that, though, I think it'd be really helpful for our listeners to get a bit of an understanding of what you do and tell us a little bit about ISO Baseline.
Okay, so I suppose what I do is I come from an energy background, and I've been involved with ISO for a long number of years. So originally I came into to dealing with ISO from the technical expert perspective, helping people build their management systems. And then from that progressed on to working with certification bodies as an auditor for management systems. So I started to get to recognize a lot of the challenges that organizations have with management systems. And then I suppose went out to try to figure out how to make it better, how to remove some of those challenges. And the area I tend to watch very closely is if you look at organizations from a maintenance perspective, that in particular organizations that maintenance is really critical to them, and they have real strict requirements on being able to provide information that proves without a doubt that they are meeting their maintenance requirements and their maintenance objectives. They tend to use maintenance management systems, which are software systems that have been essentially designed around maintenance processes. So they've been structurally built purely to allow organizations to manage and do maintenance properly. So effectively, Baseline 50001 is a software package that's built in that principle, but built to allow organizations to manage their energy processes correctly and being able to provide real sound evidence that they are meeting their energy objectives. So that feeds in neatly to the requirements for meeting requirements for 50,001 and also meeting requirements for ESOS and other schemes, etc.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Ian. So what type of features would that include then?
So essentially, if you think about any almost reading an energy audit report where organizations typically display the information in graphs and Sankey diagrams. So it effectively gives you the ability to do that. But then the opportunities that are identified within an audit report would be all recorded in opportunities registers, which does a lot of the heavy lifting for individuals, the financial assessments, the figuring out of life cycle costing and what the break-even point for projects are, the abilities to easily, I suppose, identify and prioritize opportunities, figure out what their overall savings are going to be. Like, that if you have interactive type savings where you do one thing, it gives you a particular saving, you do another one, it gives you a particular saving, but doing the two of them together might not be the same as just add one plus the other. So because of the interactive effect of savings process, the way they work. So it gives all of those tools and capabilities that essentially was built from the perspective of, I sat down with the program designer and said, right, the starting point is here. If I'm the energy manager of a large organization, what tools do I want in my toolbox to make my job easier? And that's what Baseline has been developed around. So it's designed as a tool to help you do your job, as opposed to, in lots of cases, compliance tools can be almost more like things that tell you what to do. This is more an aid for you in your job.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Ian. So the subject that we're going to be talking about today is ESOS, the Energy Saving Opportunity Scheme. Could you just explain to our listeners what ESOS is before we then start to discuss some of the changes that have come into place in the last couple of months?
Okay, so what ESOS, it started out from back in the day so long ago when the UK was part of the European Union, when there was a European directive, 2012-26EU, if my memory serves me correctly, was a directive on energy efficiency, and it placed a requirement for all member states in the EU to put together schemes for ensuring large organizations or large undertakings, as the language was, undertake audits on a regular basis, on a 4-yearly basis. Essentially, that was implemented in the UK using a set of legislation known as the ESOS regulations. So ESOS is Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme. And essentially, if you have an organization that has ISO 50001 in place across all of its organization, the scope covering all of its energy, well, that placed you into a situation where simply having, under the old legislation, having the certificate for 50,001 meant you complied with the regulation. If you didn't have that single situation where one certification system managed all of your energy, then you were required to use what's known as an ESOS lead assessor to see whether your organization met the requirements laid down under the ESOS regulations. Those regulations at the time meant that you had to effectively meet the ESOS requirements by doing the equivalent of an audit over 90% of your energy, the energy consumption of the organization. One of the unusual things that it did was, for the first time for anyone in the wider European Union, it sort of brought us to say transport is part of energy. Now, that had been, I think, embedded in the UK a lot longer than most other places where you would recognize transport energy a bit earlier, whereas for most of us, we were then saying, oh, 90% of our energy, including transport, but transport is handled by different people, which brought us it was a little bit of a challenge from that perspective. And the requirement for at that stage was that you'd cover 90% of your energy by either using one or other or a combination of having a ISO 50001 scheme for part of your organization. You could have a Green Deal certificate, effectively where you were working under a green loan scheme, effectively updating part of your processes or areas. You could have a DEC certificate, a display energy certificate, or an ESOS energy audit to cover. So essentially, you needed to cover the scope of 90% of your total energy consumption needed to be addressed under those areas, where essentially where you were required to look at the areas, identify your significant energy consumption, and identify ways of putting in logical, practical approaches towards reducing energy consumption, improving energy performance. And that's what the scheme was designed to do.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Ian. So there have been some recent changes, though, I understand, that affect the compliance to ESOS. Could you give me an overview of what those changes are?
Yeah, okay, so the changes caught a few people off guard, to be honest, because the way ESOS worked was that technically we should be gone out of phase 3. So ESOS worked in 4-yearly chunks where you were required to report by the 5th of December every year. And the last reporting period was the 5th of December 2023. But shortly before the end of that reporting period, the ESOS regulations were updated and the reporting was then extended by 6 months. So the ESOS scheme at the moment that we're still in phase 3, but phase 3 reporting will finish in June 2024. And there's a number of different requirements that have changed. Probably the major ones are, instead of accounting for 90% of your total final energy consumption, you're now required to account for 95% of your total final energy consumption. So that de minimis component of it is reduced by 50%. The other sort of significant change that's there as well is that all organizations will be required to develop activity metrics. And as part of your audit, you'll be required to submit activity metrics. So, for example, that might be for buildings per meter squared. For production organizations, it might be per ton output of your organization. And the interesting scenario with that is that then gives the UK the ability to effectively assess organizations over a time period to see, like, from a phase 3 to phase 4 to phase 5, to see how improvement is actually working. And all of those activity metrics will be published. So effectively, it could become, if you look at the idea of benchmarking, it gives the ability to sort of, if you could get similar organizations and benchmark organizations against one another. Let's just say it's an interesting development that's come out of the new regulations.
Okay, so they're quite major changes then. So just to recap on that, so in terms of the reporting, it's going to be moving from 90% to 95%, which is quite significant when you look at the level of detail that will be required on the reporting. And secondly, the submission of the activity methods and metrics. That's interesting, which obviously ISO 50001 is providing the methodology. You have to have policies, procedures, energy performance indicators, etc. So I can see that would be fairly straightforward if you've already got ISO 50001. But if it's a straightforward ESOS energy audit, some energy auditors may not necessarily include that. So what other changes are there then? Are they the most significant ones?
Kind of. The next most significant one is the fact that under the previous approach, what you were required to do was to report that you had done your audit and report your overall savings potential. But now what you're also required to do is you're required to submit your action plans. So what you are required as part of the audit to do is to identify the proposed action plan that the organization is intending to put in place to improve its energy performance, and will also be required to report annually on your progress towards that action plan. So it's moving from a situation where organizations could just tick a box and do the audit every 4 years if they wanted to. But now what's going to be available is publicly disclosable information that's available to basically, to some extent, name and shame organizations that don't do anything to make an improvement.
I think that's really important, actually, isn't it? So I think one of the things that I've been quite critical of in the past, and I've mentioned it on previous podcasts when we've covered ESOS, is that it only comes around once every 4 years. And some businesses might just want to do the quick and dirty option and do an ESOS energy audit, get it out of the way and don't do anything for the next 4 years. Well, if businesses want to achieve net zero, because let's face it, we'll have to because we're in a climate emergency, that's not really going to do anything, is it? It's not going to cut it. We need to take action. We need to address how we're going to continually manage and reduce and monitor and measure our energy consumption and obviously GHG emissions that result from the use of that energy. So are you then saying that the action plan needs to be made publicly available? I know you mentioned the word publicly available, but is it a requirement of the regulations now?
Incidentally, it always has been a requirement that everything that has been reportable on ESOS is accessible publicly. But previously, you were not required to report your action plans. So that is additional information that is now being reported. And all of that reported information will be publicly accessible.
Good. So in effect, that could be part of the carbon reduction plan as well, I'm guessing, because that's a requirement for a lot of organisations here in the UK to have a carbon reduction plan.
Yes. And I think what's happening with ESOS is there was so much other legislation that was around in the UK, and what they've taken the opportunity to, I suppose, make them more aligned with one another and to ensure that they're all working towards a common purpose. In this update, it hasn't ultimately required you to determine your energy savings potential and carbon reduction. But quite obviously, it would be a little bit ludicrous of an organization that if they were to do it and not to look at it from a carbon perspective. It's only a tiny little additional step when you're doing it from a money perspective and an energy perspective to figure out what the carbon impact is.
Absolutely. So that ties in beautifully with SECR reporting. So that's annual reporting, isn't it, on basically an annual carbon report that organisations of a certain size has to do. So obviously it ties in with the action plans for ESOS on energy efficiency, which could then tie into GHG reporting. So verification of emissions on an annual basis, which is something that Carbonology does that we've talked about in this podcast before. And anybody that's interested in finding out more about that, they need to go over to www.carbonologyhub.com to find out more information about it. Are you new to ISO standards and want to know what it's all about? Or maybe your company has multiple ISO standards, but there's a lack of engagement and compliance. Whether it's quality, sustainability or risk standards, the Isology Hub is your one-stop shop for all your online learning resources associated with raising your company's standards. From as little as £99 a month, you can have unlimited access to hundreds of online training courses and achieve certification for completion of courses along the way, which will take you from learner to practitioner to leader in no time. So what courses are in the Hub? Well, there are courses on everything a head of quality, sustainability, information security and health and safety would need to manage compliance and raise standards. With over 100 courses available to you, here are examples of just a few. ISO 9001 Internal Auditor, how to transition to the new ISO 27001 standard, the role of ESG in quality management, and how to integrate management systems. But it's not just courses in the Isology Hub. You can access templates, downloads, and action checklists to take your business to the next level. So why not try the Isology Hub today? Just click on the link at www.isologyhub.com and you'll get access to all our resources within minutes. If you're interested in embedding best practice across your organisation or would like to develop an awareness and training programme for employees, we offer a free learning and development session to tailor a bespoke training programme based on your organisation's needs. So we'd love for you to join as an Isology Hub member. Just head over to isologyhub.com to get access to your unlimited training and compliance resources. So that's three main changes. That sounds as though they're the most significant ones. Are there any other changes at all, Ian, that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, primarily for organizations that were ESOS, that were using the ESOS compliance route previously. Essentially, previously, all they had to do was they had to submit a copy of their certificate, and that was enough for them. Now they do have to submit. It is a reduced set of requirements that they need to do. The way that the information that's coming out from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero is basically saying if you're going down the full ISO 50001 compliance approach, you report using what's called the Annex 1 form, which is a reduced reporting requirement where you do not need to use an ESOS lead assessor professional person to do it. The organization can do it themselves. Whereas if you're using ISO as part of your compliance requirements, so if you're not managing 100% of your energy under your ISO 50001 scheme, you are then reporting using the Annex 2 approach, and you need an ESOS lead assessor to work with you on that reporting approach. So essentially, if you're using ISO as part of your reporting methodology, well, then you're essentially in the same camp as the remainder. It's pretty much the same requirements for going down as if you were doing an ESOS audit or using DEX certificates, etc.
That could actually save an organisation quite a bit of money from not necessarily having to get an ESOS lead assessor to sign off the report, because if they've got ISO 50001 to cover their scope of energy across their sites, then they can do that internally. And obviously the cost of either sending somebody on an ESOS course can be a couple of £1,000, because you generally have to go down, let's say if it's SIBC, it's the low carbon consultant route. I think there are about 8 or so different routes to being a qualified ESOS lead assessor. So that's one saving. Or if a company was outsourcing it to an ESOS lead assessor to sign that off, that would be a saving of money. But obviously, you've got the cost of 50,001 to deal with. But either way, it's good to always get some, identify some cost savings somewhere down the road.
And I suppose ultimately, if an organization is using 50,001 properly within the organization, the benefits to it should go well beyond the savings or release for an ESOS lead assessor anyway.
True. Yeah, definitely. Are there any changes in terms of the eligibility criteria, Ian? So I think in the past it's been, if you've got over 250 employees or over 43 million euros, then ESOS is applicable. Are there any changes at all when it comes to eligibility that you're aware of?
There isn't really any major change in terms of the eligibility approach. There's a number of subtle changes. Like, for example, previously before Brexit, like all of the ESOS legislation came out pre-Brexit. So therefore, all of the legislation previously was effectively a euro equivalent of there was a euro amount dictated in the European directive, and the legislation was effectively taking the euro amount or the approximate sterling equivalent. So obviously enough now that has changed. So it's changed the amount back to a sterling amount, but it's not any significant difference in that regards. So it's just purely a sort of a tidying up the paperwork for that perspective.
So, how do you think that these changes are going to impact organisations then?
Well, I think the major change that people will have to adapt to is that doing your audit and just doing it every 4 years is no longer going to be. It previously would have been, oh, that's it, I'm done for 4 years. Now I can forget about it. Whereas if organizations are, let's say, concerned about their image in the public eye, they now need to start looking at it from the perspective that they're going to be reporting every year. The information about them is going to be publicly available every year. Their competitors are going to have access to that information. So if they're trying to put out an image of themselves as being environmentally friendly, as being carbon friendly, etc., their competitors have clear access to information that could they could very easily compare themselves against one another. And I think that's what's really intended by the legislation, is to try to, let's say, incentivize organizations to do more than the minimum requirement of just doing an audit every 4 years and forgetting about it. Now they need to start looking at it. How could this be viewed out in the marketplace if I do nothing and if my nearest competitor is a lot better than me in what they're doing? I think it's a statement of intent as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think that the fact that there's added accountability there now is something that's long overdue. I know that obviously we're in the third round of ESOS now, and for years now, I've just thought that, yeah, I think it's handy for the government to know, what the energy consumption is of organisations. That's a benefit to them. But it's not really benefiting the organisations, it's not benefiting the environment, it's not benefiting society, because it's just literally a report and a number with a few suggestions on how we can improve energy efficiency within an organisation. But all along, there hasn't been any accountability until now. So I'm delighted with the fact that businesses are going to have to be accountable. They are actually going to have to practice what they preach. Said that they're going to be doing something. Well, where are the results? And let's not wait for 4 years to see the difference.
And I think as well as that, if an organization is really wanting to do the best thing, to do the right thing, it makes a lot of sense now for them to start looking at it from the perspective of, well, okay, let's use the audit and try to use the audit in putting together your carbon zero roadmap. And I think that's partially what could well work well from a UK regulator perspective, because getting access to the information, if organizations treat it correctly, if auditors do their job properly, the information coming from those action plans could be really beneficial for the UK government in trying to figure out, well, we've said we're going to get to carbon zero, net zero. Well, now we're going to have practical information on how practical that's really going to be. And following that, where the challenges are going to be from it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it does make the progress more transparent and how businesses are actually doing in terms of those reductions. And I think a lot of businesses are really taking it seriously and going well above and beyond ESOS. I think, I don't want to kind of do a disservice to any organisations that are out there that are going way above and beyond just doing the ESOS energy reporting. So I know that a lot of those have got ISO 50001 because they want to have that system in place. They want to systemize energy management so that they're continually optimizing their use of energy, their resources, and obviously that identifies what the costs currently are and then what the cost savings could potentially be year on year. So going back to ISO baseline then, so I'm interested to hear then, Ian, how ISO baseline 50001 can support businesses with their ESOS compliance.
Well, I would be more inclined to say it's more if organizations have a real objective to improve their energy performance. That's where ISO baseline will come to their aid most. If they just want to be ESOS compliant, I would be saying, well, that's fine. We probably don't really want to work with you. If you're setting your goal on just meeting your minimum requirements, that's not really the type of customers that we would want to be working with. We want to work with organizations that are progressive, that are saying, we are going to set ourselves stringent targets to improve in terms of our energy and carbon reduction. So we want to have access to the tools that will help us to get to there and to work with organizations. So that's the type of organization we want to work with, as opposed to let's just tick the box. Let's do a minimum compliance requirements. So if you have an organization that is keen on becoming, say, the market leader or really reducing down their carbon emissions or their energy consumption, ISO is really progressive and it's very useful as a tool to systemize things, but it can also, depending on how good you are at systemizing, quite a lot of organizations get caught up in the bureaucracy of ISO management systems. Now, I'll be the first to say the ISO standards themselves do not require a high level of bureaucracy, but in quite a lot of cases, the implementation and how ISO is implemented in organizations can sometimes lead to people sort of spending lots of time managing the management system and instead of spending time focusing on the objectives of what the management system is meant to lead to. And that's what Baseline 50001 has been designed around. It's been designed around getting real understandings of what you're required to do and try to take out those bureaucratic things that people get caught up with, make it much easier for gathering evidence. So if you make the processes your way of doing things, well, then you become 100% audit ready at all times, as opposed to having to spend weeks preparing for audits. So it's a mechanism of just basically using the tool and going in. And again, with every piece of software, you have to be really careful, because I can't turn around and say to any organization, you need to change everything you're doing to manage energy the way I want you to manage it. It's built the other way around. It's built in a way that's really, really flexible, and that you adapt the software to the organization, but you set the system up in the same way as you set up any other system, like a maintenance management system or a SAP or any of these process approaches. You set the system up in the way that you want to operate within the business to meet the requirements. And then the tool will guide you through things. If something is meant to be done, if you're meant to hold an internal audit, are you meant to update your internal audit plan? Are you meant to do a management review? It will task people to do it. You set it up to task people to do it, but ultimately you're reporting back your internal audits into the system. Quite often when people do internal audits and they identify non-conformities in their internal audit, they get caught up with the minutiae of, right, we have a non-conformance, we need to take action to correct the issue. We then need to take corrective action to prevent it from recurring. We need to check whether the potential issue could occur somewhere else, etc. We need to implement the corrective action. We need to review the effectiveness of the corrective action. And to somebody like me or you, Mel, who are embedded into management systems, and we all understand what all of those steps mean, to a lot of other people, they can get tripped up. They think, oh, I've fixed the problem. What else do I need to do? And now they have a problem when they move into the next external or internal audit. So with the process, the way it's been built like, if you think, I tend to look at it like a relay race, that when I'm holding the baton as doing the audit, I've identified the finding. I now have to hand the baton to the next individual. And if they don't complete everything, they have to hand the baton to the next individual. So the tasks are effectively managed so that nobody can drop the baton by mistake. You can always ignore what you're meant to do, but if at least you understand what you're meant to do, and the system guides you through all of the steps along the way. So it's the only system that I am aware of that allows you to have a complete 50,001 management system in one process. It allows you to integrate to other systems that you have. If you have existing metering systems in place and this existing monitoring and targeting system, we can integrate it into the system. So we take data from your M&T system, your performance indicators are there. It does your actual versus expected energy consumption. If you go out of your tolerances that you've set on your performance indicators, it will task somebody to do an investigation of deviations. So it has all of the systems inbuilt in it, so that it basically makes energy management part of the organization as opposed to a bolt-on sort of something that's completely different.
I'm all for that, definitely. Integrating it into the organisation's DNA, I think that's the only way forward, really, in order to make it effortless. I think anything that can help to simplify ISO, make life easier for the client, but then produce some impactful, quantifiable results at the end of it, I think has got to be a winner. So thanks very much for your time today, Ian. That's been really insightful hearing about the changes with ESOS and also how ISO Baseline can provide support in relation to that journey as well. So how can our podcast listeners find you then, Ian?
You can find me at ian.boylan@isobaseline.com is probably my easiest, or to www.isobaseline.com.
Fantastic. Great. We'll include links to that in the podcast show notes. So for our listeners that may be listening to this, driving along, don't worry, you can get access to the show notes if you haven't been able to jot down any notes whilst you've been listening, and also click on the link if you want to pick Ian's brains even further and maybe have a look at the ISO baseline system, then I'm sure Ian will be happy to do that as well. Okay, that's great. Well, yeah, thanks again for your time today, Ian.
That's great. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for inviting me on.
Great. Okay, so thanks very much for listening today. I hope that's been useful for you, finding out about the updates, the energy management regulations across Europe. And I'm sorry if you're not in Europe, but hopefully this has given you some insight into ways that energy management could potentially be reported on with using technology like ISO Baseline. So I look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of the ISO Show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.